Welcome to Chosen by Love, where fate brings hearts together in the most unexpected ways. Subscribe and join our growing family of story lovers. Tell us where you're watching from, and let's begin today's journey. Sometimes the person who broke your heart never stopped loving you, and the truth waits years to be discovered. The first thing Madeline Harper noticed when she drove back into Cedar Creek was how little the town had changed. The white church still stood at the center of Main Street. The old water tower still rose above the trees like a silent guardian. Even the diner with the faded red sign looked exactly as it had when she was 17, and believed her whole future could fit inside a single dream. A cold October breeze swept across the windshield as she slowed her car and stared out at the familiar streets. For a moment she forgot about Chicago. She forgot about the apartment she had packed up 2 days ago. She forgot about the marketing job she had lost after 7 exhausting years. Back here everything felt smaller, simpler, safer. At least that was what she told herself. Her mother had insisted she come home. Just for a few weeks, she had said over the phone. You need some rest, sweetheart. Madeline had agreed because she was tired. Tired of pretending everything was fine. Tired of waking up in a city that suddenly no longer felt like hers. At 31, she had expected to be moving forward, not returning to the same small town she had spent years trying to leave behind. She stopped at a traffic light and glanced toward the park across the street. The wooden benches. The walking trail. The pond surrounded by maple trees painted in shades of gold and crimson. Memories drifted through her mind before she could stop them. A boy with dark hair laughing beside her. A summer afternoon. A promise whispered beneath a sky full of stars. Her grip tightened on the steering wheel. Declan Rhodes. She had not spoken his name aloud in 13 years. The light turned green. She exhaled and continued driving. Some memories belonged in the past. 20 minutes later, she pulled into her parents' gravel driveway. The farmhouse looked exactly as she remembered. White siding, green shutters, a porch swings her father had built decades ago. Before she could open the car door, the front door flew open. Maddie! Her mother rushed outside with tears already forming in her eyes. Madeline laughed for the first time all week and stepped into her mother's embrace. The familiar scent of lavender filled the air. For a few precious moments, the weight she had carried for months seemed to disappear. You look too skinny, her mother said immediately. Mom. And tired. Mom. And I blame that city. Madeline laughed again. It's good to see you too. Her father appeared behind them carrying a toolbox. Your mother's been counting down the days. Dad. He wrapped her in a tight hug. Welcome home, kiddo. Home. The word settled somewhere deep inside her chest. Later that afternoon, after unpacking a few boxes, Madeline volunteered to run into town for groceries. The air smelled of fallen leaves and fresh rain as she walked along Main Street. People nodded and smiled in recognition. Some faces had changed. Others hadn't changed at all. She was halfway across the street when she heard the sound of engines approaching. Not one vehicle. Several. The traffic around her slowed. Curious, she glanced toward the center of town. A line of black luxury SUVs rolled to a stop outside the historic bank building. People immediately began whispering. Store owners stepped outside. A few teenagers lifted their phones to record. Madeline frowned. Cedar Creek was not the kind of place where something like this happened. Then one of the SUV doors opened. A tall man stepped out. The entire world seemed to stop moving. Her heartbeat vanished. Her breath caught. For a second she wondered if she was imagining him. The man straightened his charcoal coat and looked toward the street. Older now. Broader shoulders. Stronger jawline. Confidence in every movement. But there was no mistaking those eyes. Declan Rhodes. The boy who had once promised her forever. The boy who had disappeared without a goodbye. The boy who had broken her heart. He turned his head. Their eyes met across the crowded street. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The years between them seemed to vanish in a single heartbeat. Surprise flashed across his face. Then something deeper. Something that looked almost like disbelief. Madeline felt her pulse pounding in her ears. She had imagined this moment in 100 different ways over the years. In every version she was prepared. In every version she knew exactly what she would say. But standing there now, Staring at the billionaire who had once been her first love, she realized she was completely unprepared. And what she did not know was that Declan Rhodes had been carrying a secret for 13 years. A secret that was about to change everything she thought she knew about the past. Madeline stood frozen in the middle of Main Street long after the traffic began moving again. Around her, people continued talking, pointing, and whispering about Cedar Creek's most famous success story. But their voices sounded distant, muffled by the rush of memories flooding her mind. She remembered football games beneath bright Friday night lights. She remembered summer evenings by Miller Lake. She remembered a 17-year-old boy sitting beside her on the old wooden dock, promising that no matter where life took them, they would face it together. Then she remembered the morning he disappeared. No phone call. No letter. No explanation. Just silence. Painfully complete silence. Madeline. The deep voice snapped her back to reality. Her breath caught. Declan had crossed the street. He stood only a few feet away now. Up close, the years were impossible to ignore. The boy she had loved was gone. In his place stood a man who carried himself with quiet confidence. Expensive watch. Tailored coat. The unmistakable presence of someone accustomed to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. Yet there was something familiar in his eyes. Something she wished she could ignore. "I cannot believe it is really you," he said softly. Madeline forced herself to look away. "Apparently it is." An awkward silence settled between them. "When did you get back?" he asked. "Yesterday." "How long are you staying?" "I do not know." She hated how nervous she suddenly felt. Declan gave a small nod. "Your parents must be happy." "They are." Another silence. The kind that felt heavy with things neither person knew how to say. Finally he smiled faintly. "You look exactly the same." Madeline almost laughed. "That is impossible." "Not exactly the same," he corrected. "Just." He stopped himself. Whatever word he had intended to use never arrived. She crossed her arms. "You look different." "I hope that is not a bad thing." "I did not say it was a good thing either." The smile disappeared. For a brief moment she saw genuine regret flicker across his face. Good, she thought. Let him feel uncomfortable. Let him feel at least a fraction of what she had carried for 13 years. A black SUV pulled up beside the curb. A man in a suit stepped out and approached. "Mr. Rhodes, the meeting starts in 10 minutes. Declan nodded but kept his attention on Madeline. "Would you maybe like to get coffee sometime?" The question caught her off guard. Of all the things she expected, that was not one of them. Coffee. Just to talk. She stared at him. After 13 years? His jaw tightened slightly. Yes. After 13 years. Madeline felt old wounds reopening. Questions she had buried long ago suddenly demanded answers. Why had he left? Why had he never come back? Why was he standing here now acting as if none of it mattered? "I do not think that is a good idea," she said. Something darkened in his expression, though he quickly hid it. "I understand." He stepped back toward the waiting vehicle. "It was good seeing you, Maddie." The nickname hit harder than she expected. He had not called her that since high school. Before she could respond, he climbed into the SUV. The door closed. Seconds later, the motorcade disappeared down the street. Madeline remained standing there long after it was gone. That evening, she sat on the porch swing watching the sun sink behind the fields. Her mother joined her carrying 2 mugs of hot cider. "You saw him today, did you not?" Madeline turned sharply. "How did you know?" Her mother smiled knowingly. "Small town." Madeline stared into her drink. "He asked me to get coffee. And I said no." Her mother remained quiet for several seconds. "Do you still hate him?" The question lingered in the cool autumn air. Madeline wanted to answer immediately. She wanted to say yes. It would have been easier, simpler. But as the last rays of sunlight faded across the fields, she realized the truth was far more complicated. Because for the first time in 13 years, she was no longer wondering where Declan Rhodes had gone. She was wondering why he had come back. The next few days should have been quiet. That was what Madeline wanted. She planned to help her mother around the house, spend time with her father, and figure out what came next. Instead, Cedar Creek seemed determined to place Declan Rhodes directly in her path at every possible opportunity. On Tuesday morning she walked into the local bakery and found a crowd gathered around the television mounted above the counter. The screen showed a ribbon-cutting ceremony at Cedar Creek Community Hospital. Standing beside the mayor was Declan. He looked comfortable in front of cameras, shaking hands and smiling politely as reporters asked questions. "That new cardiac wing would never have happened without him," the cashier said proudly. "He donated nearly $5 million. Madeline accepted her coffee and looked away. She did not know why the information bothered her. Maybe because it was easier to dislike the boy who had left than the man everyone seemed to admire. Later that afternoon she returned home and found her father standing beside a broken tractor near the barn. "Need a hand?" she asked. Her father sighed. The transmission finally gave up. He wiped grease from his hands and glanced toward the driveway. Although it might not be a problem anymore. Madeline followed his gaze. A black pickup truck was pulling onto the property. Her stomach immediately tightened. The driver stepped out. Declan. Of course it was Declan. He walked toward them carrying a folder under one arm. "Mr. Harper," he called. "I hope I am not interrupting." Her father smiled warmly. "Not at all." Madeline folded her arms. "What are you doing here?" Declan looked at her briefly before returning his attention to her father. "The construction team inspected the north field this morning. We can start repairing the drainage system next week." Madeline blinked. "Repairing what?" Her father cleared his throat. "Declan's foundation has been helping local family farms." "Helping," she repeated. "For months now," her father said. "Half the farms around here would have struggled through the drought without the grants." Declan shifted uncomfortably. "It is not a big deal." Madeline stared at him. The boy she remembered would have never described millions of dollars as not a big deal. The realization unsettled her more than she cared to admit. During the following week, similar moments kept happening. She heard about scholarships funded by his company. She learned that he had restored the town library. One afternoon she discovered he had quietly paid for new equipment at the fire station. Everywhere she turned there seemed to be another story. Another person grateful for something he had done. Yet the most confusing part was that Declan never talked about any of it himself. If anything, he appeared uncomfortable whenever people praised him. Saturday evening arrived with the annual Harvest Festival. Main Street glowed beneath strings of warm lights. Families wandered between food stands and live music. Children laughed as they raced through piles of fallen leaves. Madeline was carrying 2 cups of hot cider when she accidentally bumped into someone near the town square. The cups tilted dangerously. Before she could react, a familiar hand steadied one of them. "Careful." Her pulse skipped. Declan stood beside her. Close enough that she could see the tiny scar near his eyebrow she remembered from high school. "Thank you," she said quietly. For several seconds neither moved. The sounds of the festival seemed to fade into the background. Then she noticed something strange. A shadow crossed his face. His smile weakened for an instant. One hand pressed briefly against his chest before dropping away. The moment passed so quickly she wondered if she had imagined it. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Of course." The answer came too fast. His eyes shifted away. Then he smiled again, but something about it felt practiced. Controlled. Like a man determined not to reveal what he was truly feeling. And for the first time since returning to Cedar Creek, Madeline found herself asking a different question. Not why had Declan left all those years ago, but what exactly was he hiding now? The question followed Madeline everywhere during the days that followed. What was Declan hiding? It should not have mattered. She had spent 13 years convincing herself that his choices no longer affected her life. Yet every time she saw him, every time she caught that brief shadow behind his smile, curiosity pulled her closer. Monday morning arrived wrapped in gray clouds and steady rain. Madeline volunteered to pick up supplies for her mother from the pharmacy on the edge of town. As she stepped inside, shaking rainwater from her coat, she froze. Declan was standing near the prescription counter. He did not see her. His attention remained fixed on the pharmacist, who handed him a small white bag. The exchange lasted only seconds. Declan thanked her quietly and slipped the bag into his coat pocket. Then he turned and left through a side exit. Something about the interaction felt strange. Not dramatic. Not suspicious. Just private. Very private. Before Madeline could stop herself, she approached the counter. "Busy morning?" she asked casually. The pharmacist smiled. "Always." Madeline nodded toward the door. "I think I just saw Declan Rhodes." "You probably did." The woman immediately returned to organizing paperwork. The conversation was over. Whatever answers existed were not going to come from there. That evening Madeline sat on the porch swing watching rain collect on the fields. Her father joined her carrying a flashlight. "You have been thinking hard all day. Is it that obvious?" He chuckled. "You get that look when something is bothering you." She hesitated. "Dad, do you know Declan well now?" The older man took his time answering. "Better than most people do." "Then tell me something." He leaned against the porch railing. "What? Is he happy?" Her father seemed genuinely surprised by the question. "Why would you ask that?" Madeline stared into the darkness beyond the fields. "Everyone talks about how successful he is. The money, the company, the foundation." She paused. "But every time I see him, he looks tired." Her father remained silent for several moments. "Success does not always make people happy, Maddie. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I can give." The response only deepened the mystery. 2 days later another strange moment occurred. Madeline was leaving the local diner when she spotted Declan's SUV parked across the street. He emerged from a small brick office building carrying a stack of folders. A silver-haired attorney walked beside him. They stopped near the vehicle. The lawyer handed Declan a thick envelope. Even from a distance she could see the serious expressions on both men's faces. Declan signed several pages, shook the attorney's hand, and stared at the envelope for a long moment before placing it carefully inside his briefcase. It looked less like a business transaction and more like something personal, something important. As the days passed, the pattern continued. Pharmacy visits, meetings with attorneys, quiet appointments that seemed unrelated to his company or foundation. Yet whenever she encountered him in public, he remained warm and patient. He asked about her parents. He remembered details from stories she had told him years ago. Once he even stopped to help a stranded driver change a flat tire on the highway outside town. The contradiction frustrated her. The kind, thoughtful man standing in front of her seemed real. But so did the secrets. One crisp Saturday afternoon, Madeline found herself walking the trail around Miller Lake. The same lake where they had spent countless summers as teenagers. Fallen leaves drifted across the water. The air smelled of pine and approaching winter. She rounded a bend in the path and stopped. Declan stood alone on the old dock, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the lake. He looked completely unaware that anyone else existed. For the first time since she returned home, he seemed vulnerable. Not like a billionaire. Not like a public figure. Just a man carrying something heavy. Slowly she stepped onto the dock. The wood creaked beneath her feet. Declan turned. Surprise flashed across his face before softening into a smile. "I had a feeling I would find you here someday," he said quietly. Madeline looked past him toward the water where golden reflections shimmered beneath the late afternoon sun. Then she met his eyes. "Maybe that depends on what you are still not telling me." For the first time the smile disappeared completely. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The lake stretched quietly behind them, reflecting the fading afternoon sunlight in shades of gold and amber. Declan looked away first. His gaze settled on the water as if searching for an answer hidden somewhere beneath its surface. "Some things are difficult to explain," he said quietly. Madeline folded her arms. "Try." A faint smile touched his lips, but it carried no humor. "You always were direct. And you always avoided questions." The comment landed harder than she intended. Declan lowered his eyes. "Fair enough." The wind stirred fallen leaves across the dock. Somewhere in the distance a bird called from the trees. Everything felt peaceful except for the tension standing between them. "I know I owe you answers," he finally said. "More than you realize." Madeline studied him carefully. The confidence she usually saw in him seemed absent now. In its place was uncertainty, vulnerability. It reminded her of the boy she used to know. Then why not tell me? She asked softly. Declan looked at her. For a second she thought he might finally reveal everything. Instead he shook his head. Not yet. Frustration rose inside her chest. You see? This is exactly what I mean. She turned toward the shoreline. You show up after 13 years, act like nothing happened, and then expect me to trust you while you keep secrets. I do not expect that. Then what do you expect? His answer came so quietly she almost missed it. A chance. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. She looked away before he could see the effect it had on her. Silence settled between them again. Then Declan pointed toward a narrow trail leading into the trees. Come with me. Madeline frowned. Where? Just trust me. She nearly laughed at the irony. Yet curiosity won. A few minutes later they followed the path through a grove of maple trees glowing orange and red beneath the late autumn sky. The trail wound around the lake until they reached a small clearing. Madeline stopped immediately. She had not seen this place in years. Near the edge of the water stood an old wooden mailbox mounted on a weathered post. Time had faded the paint and warped the wood, but it remained standing exactly where they had left it. The mailbox, she whispered. Declan nodded. Memories flooded back instantly. Summers spent writing silly notes to each other. Secret letters hidden inside. Promises. Dreams. Plans for futures they were certain would happen. Madeline stepped closer. Her fingertips brushed the rough wood. I thought this was gone. I made sure it stayed. She turned toward him. You did. He nodded again. Every year. The admission surprised her. Why? Declan hesitated. Because some things matter even when time passes. The words lingered between them. Madeline opened the tiny mailbox door. Inside she found nothing except a single dried maple leaf. Yet somehow the empty space felt full of memories. She smiled despite herself. Do you remember that summer when you wrote me a letter every day for 2 months? Declan laughed softly. You kept grading my spelling mistakes. Someone had to. I was 17. You spelled definitely wrong 23 times. He laughed again, and for the first time in years the sound felt familiar. Real. The wall between them lowered slightly. Not gone. Just weaker. As the sun began sinking behind the trees, they sat together on a nearby bench overlooking the water. Conversation came easier than either expected. They talked about old teachers, former classmates, the town, life after high school. Some topics remained untouched. Others flowed naturally. Time seemed to blur. Eventually the temperature dropped. A cool breeze swept across the lake. Madeline shivered slightly. Without thinking, Declan removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was simple, familiar, thoughtful. Their eyes met. Neither looked away. The moment stretched longer than it should have. Longer than either intended. Then Declan reached into his pocket as if remembering something important. His expression changed instantly. A shadow crossed his face. He glanced toward the parking area beyond the trees. The warmth disappeared from his eyes. I should go, he said suddenly. Madeline stared at him. What happened? Nothing. The answer came too quickly. Again. Before she could question him further, his phone vibrated. He checked the screen. Whatever message appeared there seemed to drain the remaining color from his face. He slipped the phone away and forced a smile. Thank you for coming with me. Then he walked toward the trail. Madeline watched him disappear between the trees. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. And as she stood beside the old mailbox watching the last sunlight fade across the lake, she realized she was no longer trying to protect her heart from Declan Rhodes. She was trying to understand what frightened him so much. The uneasy feeling followed Madeline for the next several days. No matter how hard she tried to focus on ordinary things, her thoughts kept returning to Declan's expression at the lake. She had seen fear in his eyes. Not the kind caused by business problems or public pressure. Something deeper. More personal. Thursday afternoon arrived cold and bright. Her mother asked her to bring a box of homemade cookies to the community center, where volunteers were preparing for the annual holiday fundraiser. Madeline agreed, grateful for the distraction. The center buzzed with activity when she arrived. Folding tables filled the main hall. Volunteers sorted decorations while local business owners delivered donations for the silent auction. As she carried the box toward the registration desk, she spotted a familiar figure across the room. Declan stood beside the event coordinator reviewing paperwork. For a moment she considered leaving before he noticed her. Then the coordinator waved enthusiastically. Madeline! Perfect timing. Several heads turned, including Declan's. His expression softened immediately. Hi, he said. The simple greeting felt strangely intimate after everything that had happened. The coordinator handed Declan a folder. Can you take these auction forms to the conference room? He nodded. Of course. As he turned away, a thick envelope slipped from between the pages and landed on the floor. Neither of them noticed. The coordinator immediately pulled Madeline into a conversation about decorations. Several minutes passed before she looked down and spotted the envelope near her feet. She picked it up automatically. Declan's name was printed neatly across the front. I should return this, she said. The coordinator pointed toward the conference room at the end of the hallway. Madeline walked quickly through the building. The hallway was empty. The conference room door stood slightly open. She raised her hand to knock when voices drifted through the opening. Declan was inside speaking with an older man she recognized as the attorney she had seen weeks earlier. She paused, not intentionally listening, just long enough to hear a single sentence. The trust documents are complete, the attorney said. If anything happens, everything transfers according to your instructions. Madeline froze. Trust documents. Transfers. The words sent a chill through her. She should have walked away. Instead she glanced down at the envelope in her hand. It had partially opened when it fell. A few papers had shifted inside. Before she could stop herself, her eyes caught a name printed across one page. Madeline Harper. Her breath caught. For a moment she thought she must be mistaken. She carefully slid the document back into place. But she had seen it clearly. Her own name. Inside paperwork connected to Declan. Suddenly the conversation inside the room ended. Panic flashed through her. She stepped away from the doorway just as Declan emerged. There you are, she said quickly, forcing a smile and holding out the envelope. You dropped this. Relief crossed his face. Thank you. Their fingers brushed briefly as he accepted it. Then his expression changed. He noticed something in her eyes. What is wrong? Madeline shook her head. Nothing. He studied her for a second longer but said nothing. Later that evening she could not stop thinking about what she had seen. Trust documents. Attorneys. Her name. The pieces refused to fit together. Around midnight she finally gave up on sleep and walked downstairs. For a glass of water. As she passed her father's study, she noticed light beneath the door. Inside, her father sat reading paperwork at his desk. He looked up. Could not sleep. She hesitated. Then asked the question that had been haunting her all day. Dad, if someone was preparing legal documents and putting my name on them, what would that mean? Her father's expression changed instantly. Not surprise. Not confusion. Recognition. And that frightened her more than anything. Because for the first time, she realized there were people in Cedar Creek who knew exactly what Declan was hiding. And one of them might be sitting right in front of her. Madeline stared at her father across the study. The silence between them felt heavier than any answer he could have given. Slowly, he removed his reading glasses and set them on the desk. Why are you asking that? He said carefully. Because I saw something today. Her voice trembled despite her efforts to control it. I saw legal documents connected to Declan. My name was on them. Her father's shoulders sagged. It was the reaction she feared most. Not confusion. Not denial. Confirmation. Dad, she whispered. What is going on? He looked away toward the dark window. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he stood and walked to the bookshelf in the corner. From the bottom drawer he removed a small wooden box. One she had not seen in years. Her heart immediately recognized it before her mind did. The box contained keepsakes from her teenage years. Old photographs. School programs. Letters. Memories. He carried it back to the desk and placed it in front of her. There are things I should have told you a long time ago. A chill spread through her chest. Her father opened the box. Near the bottom lay a yellowed envelope. The paper had aged. The edges were worn, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Declan's. Madeline felt the room tilt slightly. "What is that?" she asked. Her father closed his eyes briefly. "The last letter he wrote to you." The words hit harder than she expected. "The last what?" "The morning he left town, he came here." Her father struggled to meet her eyes. "He gave me that letter and asked me to make sure you received it." Madeline stared at him in disbelief. "You told me he disappeared." "I know. You told me he never contacted me." "I know." Her voice cracked. "Why?" The older man's face filled with regret. "Because I did not want you to see him again." Tears immediately filled her eyes. "You kept it from me? I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me from what?" Her father sank into the chair. Suddenly he looked older than she had ever seen him. "From losing everything." The room fell silent. Then he finally revealed the truth. 13 years earlier, Declan had received devastating medical news. A hereditary heart condition. The doctors could not predict the future. They only knew there was significant risk. At the same time, he had received an opportunity to leave Cedar Creek and build a career elsewhere. He had come to ask permission to continue seeing Madeline despite the uncertainty. Her father had refused. "I told him you deserved stability," he admitted quietly. "I told him you deserved someone who could promise a future." Madeline could barely breathe. "And what did he say?" "He said he loved you." Her father looked away. "He said he would love you for the rest of his life." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Then why did he leave?" "Because after the diagnosis, he believed I was right." The answer shattered something inside her. Every painful memory, every year of resentment, every assumption she had carried suddenly seemed uncertain. Her father pushed the envelope toward her. "There is more." With trembling hands she opened the letter. The words blurred through her tears, but one sentence stood out immediately. "If I ever disappear, it will never mean I stopped loving you. It will mean I loved you enough to let you have the future I might never be able to give you." A sob escaped before she could stop it. Then another realization struck her. The pharmacy visits. The doctors. The attorneys. The trust documents. Her name on the paperwork. She looked up sharply. "His condition." Her father nodded slowly. "It came back." The world seemed to stop. "How serious?" His silence answered before his words did. "Serious enough that he has been preparing for every possibility." Madeline felt her heart breaking all over again. Not because Declan had left. Not because of the years they had lost. But because while she had spent weeks questioning his secrets, he had been quietly preparing for a future he was afraid he might not live to see. Madeline did not sleep that night. She sat beside her bedroom window long after midnight, the old letter resting in her hands. Outside, the field stretched beneath a blanket of silver moonlight. Inside, 13 years of misunderstandings slowly unraveled. Every sentence she read felt like a conversation stolen by time. Every word carried the voice of the young man she had once loved, the young man who had never stopped loving her. By sunrise, only one thought remained. She had to see Declan. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today. She drove into town shortly after 8 o'clock. The streets were quiet. Most stores had not even opened yet. She went first to the foundation office. He was not there. Then to the hospital. The receptionist politely informed her he had already left. Finally, she drove to Miller Lake. Something told her to look there. The morning air felt cold against her skin as she followed the familiar trail through the trees. When she reached the old dock, she found him exactly where she expected. Declan stood alone at the edge of the water, hands buried in his coat pockets. For a moment she simply watched him. He looked tired. Not physically exhausted. Emotionally tired. Like someone who had spent too many years carrying burdens alone. The sound of her footsteps made him turn. Surprise crossed his face immediately. "Madeline." She stopped a few feet away. The letter trembled slightly in her hand. His eyes found it instantly. Every color seemed to drain from his face. "You found it." She nodded. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally she took a shaky breath. "Why did you never tell me?" Declan looked out across the lake. Because by the time I came back, too much damage had already been done. That was not your decision to make. Pain flickered across his expression. I know. The simple admission broke through the last of her anger. For years she had imagined confronting him. She had rehearsed speeches, accusations, questions. Yet standing here now, none of them seemed important anymore. I hated you, she whispered. Declan closed his eyes briefly. I know. I thought you abandoned me. I know. Her voice cracked. And all this time. He looked at her. The sadness in his eyes felt almost unbearable. I never stopped thinking about you. Tears filled her eyes instantly. Neither moved. Neither looked away. The truth stood openly between them now. Raw. Painful. Real. Then why are you preparing trust funds? She asked quietly. Why are attorneys writing documents with my name on them? Declan's shoulders stiffened. The question he had hoped to avoid had finally arrived. Madeline. No. She shook her head. No more secrets. He stared at the lake for a long time before speaking. The condition came back 6 months ago. The words landed softly but carried enormous weight. There is a procedure scheduled after Thanksgiving. She swallowed hard. And if it does not work? He did not answer immediately. He did not need to. The silence said enough. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks. So your solution was to prepare for goodbye? A bitter smile touched his lips. I thought it was the responsible thing to do. Responsible. Her voice rose. Do you know what 13 years felt like? He looked down. Every day. The answer stunned her. She suddenly realized he had been grieving too. Not just for his health. Not just for lost time. For her. For them. For everything that should have happened and never did. Slowly she stepped closer. I am not letting you disappear again. Declan looked up. Genuine surprise filled his face. Madeline. You do not get to decide my future for me anymore. The wind swept across the lake, scattering golden leaves across the water. For the first time in years, hope flickered between them. Small. Fragile. But real. And as Declan stared at her, something changed in his expression. For the first time since she had returned to Cedar Creek, he looked less like a man preparing to lose everything and more like a man beginning to believe he still had something worth fighting for. The weeks that followed felt different. Not because the uncertainty disappeared, but because neither of them faced it alone anymore. For the first time in 13 years, Madeline and Declan stopped looking backward and started moving forward. Thanksgiving arrived beneath clear skies and cold autumn sunlight. The procedure was scheduled for the following morning. Declan spent the holiday quietly with a small group of people who mattered most. His closest friends. His foundation director. And for the first time in years, the Harper family. The evening was simple. A home-cooked meal. Laughter that came easier than expected. Stories shared around a long wooden table. More than once, Declan caught himself looking across the room at Madeline and wondering how he had survived so many years without moments like this. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, they stood together on the farmhouse porch. The field stretched endlessly beneath a sky full of stars. Are you scared? Madeline asked softly. Declan considered lying. Then he smiled faintly. Terrified. She slipped her hand into his. Good. That means you still have things worth fighting for. He looked at her for a long moment. You always know exactly what to say. No. Her eyes glistened beneath the porch light. I just spent 13 years wishing I had one more chance. The next morning arrived faster than either wanted. Hours passed slowly. Waiting always seemed harder than action. Madeline sat beside his hospital room long before sunrise. She carried the old letter in her purse. The same letter that had changed everything. Whenever fear tried to overwhelm her, she read those words again. By late afternoon, a doctor finally entered the waiting area with a tired smile. Relief swept through the room before he even spoke. The procedure had gone well. Recovery would take time, but the outcome was better than anyone had hoped. Madeline closed her eyes and cried quietly. Not from sadness. From gratitude. Months passed. Winter gave way to spring. Snow melted from the fields surrounding Cedar Creek. New leaves returned to the maple trees. Life slowly found its rhythm again. Declan focused on recovery. Madeline accepted a new position helping manage community projects through his foundation. They spent long afternoons working together and quiet evenings talking about all the years they had missed. The future no longer felt like something fragile. It felt possible. One bright Saturday in May, Declan invited her to Miller Lake. The request seemed ordinary, yet something in his voice told her otherwise. She followed the familiar trail through the trees until she reached the old clearing. The mailbox still stood beside the water. Fresh paint now protected the wood. Wildflowers bloomed around the post. The lake shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Declan waited beside the bench where they had sat months earlier. "You fixed it," she said, smiling. "Some things are worth preserving." They walked together toward the mailbox. Declan opened the small door and reached inside. When he turned back, a small velvet box rested in his hand. Madeline's breath caught immediately. "Declan." He smiled nervously. For perhaps the first time in his life, the billionaire looked completely uncertain. 13 years ago, I thought I was losing my future." His voice softened. "Then I spent 13 more years believing I had already lost it." He opened the box. Sunlight danced across the diamond ring inside. "But somehow life gave me another chance." Tears filled her eyes. "You were never the boy who left me," she whispered. "You were the boy who never stopped loving me." Declan's eyes glistened. "Madeline Harper, will you marry me?" She laughed through her tears. The answer came instantly. "Yes." The word echoed across the lake. Months later, friends and family gathered beside the water where their story had begun. The ceremony was small, simple, perfect. And when the evening ended, the old mailbox remained standing quietly beneath the stars, holding one final letter inside. A new note, written together. A promise that no matter what the future brought, they would face it side by side. This time, neither of them would walk away. And for the first time in a very long time, home no longer felt like a place. Felt like a person. If this story touched your heart, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. To Chosen by Love. Your support helps us bring more unforgettable billionaire romance stories, emotional journeys, and inspiring love stories to life. Tell us in the comments, what was your favorite moment in this journey? Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next beautiful story chosen by love.